Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this Patreon bonus content episode for July 28th, 2023. I am JD Duran, and as you can see, I am joined by the one and only Richard Newby. Richard, how you doing, my friend?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. You being here, not always, but typically, it means one thing. Marvel is up to their latest shenanigans on Disney Plus. And this time we're talking everyone's favorite, Secret Invasion. Wow. Consensus across the board. Nothing but universal praise. I am, of course, kidding. That has not been the case. And it's interesting because Secret Invasion, it comes at a... Man, I don't even know how to describe it. It comes at this weird time, I guess, with Marvel and the MCU, right? Because Marvel Phase 4 was a little polarizing. I actually liked Phase 4 for the most part. I did too,
yeah.
So I might be a little bit against the grain there. I certainly understand the letdown effect, if you will, with Phase 4 and how, you come off the high of Infinity War and Endgame, and they're basically restarting the process all over again. And, when you come off that high, maybe the last thing you want as a fan is to go back to what Marvel Phase 1 was, or we're starting over. That's more or less what happened, but I kind of liked what they did. And then, and with the Disney Plus shows kind of thrown in there, I think it's fair to say it's been a little hit or miss, especially with how those shows have perhaps deteriorated slightly from, that first year with WandaVision and Loki and everything we saw there. So I think that's played a big role with at least some of the response even going into it. And then there's the actual quality of the show, which we're going to talk about. So anyway, I lay all that to say your expectations going into this. What were you thinking? What were you hoping? And then ultimately, what did you think of Secret Invasion?
I was really excited for the show. I didn't expect it to be, like the comics. The comics is such a huge, crossover event with, all the Avengers. And, it's like a big, splashy thing. And this always seemed like it was going to be, a smaller scale espionage show, focused on Nick Fury and Maria Hill and some of the stealthier agent people in the MCU, and dealing with the fallout of Captain Marvel, the Skrulls' search for a new homeworld. The cast was great. The casting announcements, Olivia Colman,
you had
Kate
Ben
Lee,
Mendelsohn,
Ben
Adair.
Amelia Clark, and then Samuel Jackson, of course, and Ben Mendelsohn.
Don Cheadle.
A great group of actors. So I was really excited to see them play off of each other, and even the smaller scale thing. I thought that there could be some really interesting character development, which did not go how I expected. I feel like I really liked those first two episodes that I saw, and I thought that we were getting some interesting character development, and also getting a look at Nick Fury as this kind of government agent who had made these promises that he did not fulfill. And I think that that's a really interesting kind of place to start. You have this guy who is largely seen as a hero, for most of the humans on Earth and the Avengers. And yet he's seen as this polarizing figure, even antagonistic figure to these Skrull refugees who have been stuck on Earth and, really not able to embrace their true selves or have their culture. Like I think that that's a really interesting place to start.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just kind of unraveled from there. And I felt a lot of the same beats were repeated in the following episodes. I mean, we had 3 out of the 6 episodes ended with a character getting shot, and just like ending after that.
Yeah.
And then the reveals of the scrolls were not particularly interesting, and I think that it undercut some of the interesting character work that was done earlier in the season.
Oh, we'll get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like by the end, it just kind of devolved into absolute nonsense that ultimately made it my least favorite MCU series by quite a bit. I was very disappointed with how it went down.
Yeah, I'm with you, and it's interesting because, as I noted, I went into this with perhaps a lot of optimism, maybe comparatively to a lot of people, because I liked Marvel Phase 4 for the most part, at least more than a lot of others, and I haven't found the Disney Plus shows to be as grating as a lot of people claim them to be as well. Like She-Hulk, I actually really liked. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah.
Even if maybe some episodes were a little fleeting, I thought the show did a really great job of being so diverting and impulsive and just, reinventing the MCU in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Miss Marvel, I thought was promising. It was a little uneven, but I thought on the whole, it established that character certainly well enough that when she reappears in the Marvel's trailer, I'm actually excited for that movie and for those characters and to kind of see where that goes. And of course, everything from that first year with like Loki and WandaVision is some of the best we've seen in the MCU. So
yeah,
they've proven that they can utilize this format well, and perhaps as this conversation goes, we should probably get into the 6-episode format and how that's maybe not working anymore. But that is to say, I went into this actually quite excited, maybe primarily because there's certainly some talk around this is going to be more of a grounded Marvel show. It's this espionage thriller. It's not going to be quite as bombastic and supernatural as what we've seen before. Of course, they undermine that a little bit later on as well. But beyond all of that, Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, he's so fun as this character. But what has he really done, since that second Captain America movie? He's been in and out, but aside from Captain Marvel, which was a prequel, really, right? But what has he done in terms of this space in this world since, let's say, Civil War? Like, we haven't really seen him do all that much, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like with the whole Infinity War Endgame saga, like we saw him literally at the very end at Tony's funeral for like a brief second. That's about it.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of questions, and the one thing we do know about him is, of course, he blipped. So there's a lot of questions surrounding Fury and his status. They've teased that he's in space. That's one thing that we saw in an end credit scene at one point as well. So like he's popped in and out in these small little brief cameos. And so here comes a show where we're finally going to get to dive into the world of Nick Fury for the first time in a really long time.
Yeah.
And boy, did they drop the ball. And here's the thing, like I don't live in a world of extremes, which, social media is. That's all you see on social media. I actually think there are some good things to this show.
Sure,
I do think ultimately it's their worst one yet, but I do think there are some good things here. Like as you're talking about, like I like that he speaks to, what his headspace has been the last few years since he's blipped, and how vulnerable he's felt as a result. We learn a little bit more about him and his relationship to the Skrulls, even as it relates to, building up his reputation within Shield and even the world stage, with the prowess of his team and what they were able to accomplish. Like we do get to hear some of that, and in the relationship he has that we've never seen before between him and the Vara character, I think is like those scenes are really tender and beautiful.
Yeah.
And Samuel L. Jackson has such a great dynamic with Charlene Woodard that, those scenes are fantastic. Like this whole series just could have been like a before trilogy, them just talking the whole time. And I think it would have been endlessly compelled by it.
Yeah.
Because their dynamic was really great. But, same thing though, even with him and Ben Mendelsohn's Talos character, like when this show is just characters talking and we get to learn more about them and their emotional state, their psychological state.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's where this show is at its strongest. And this film does take its time with that. It's when it tries to become a Marvel thing where it falls apart.
Yeah.
And it's really not good in that department, sadly.
Yeah.
So, it's a missed opportunity. I do want to get into some of the specifics of this. So I guess a spoiler warning for anyone watching, listening, because the rest of this conversation, I do want to get into some of the specifics of these twists and turns and what they reveal to us. So we can talk a little freely here, Richard. So with that out of the way, I guess where do you want to take this next as far as perhaps some of the reveals that we see? Should we talk about Rhodey? Because that's been a lot of the conversation.
Let's start with Rhodey, who was revealed to be a Skrull, which was heavily implied when he called Fury Nick, which a lot of people pointed out online that there's a line where he says, "Only my mother calls me Nick." Everybody calls him Fury, and so then that kind of started the speculation that Rhodey was a Skrull. Which, like, from the beginning of that theory, I was kind of just like disappointed if it like would be true, because I really like that conversation that they have in the second episode about kind of like what it means to be like a black man working in the government. Like I feel like those are the kind of conversations that like we don't get very often in the MCU that I feel like we should. And Samuel L. Jackson has kind of mentioned the fact that like he's bummed that he didn't appear in Black Panther. It's stuff like that where I feel like I wish that some of the people at the top like thought about those conversations and like what those spaces and characters mean to other characters.
It would have made sense for Fury to be in something like that for sure.
Yeah. So like I wasn't like too thrilled with the idea of the reveal. And then when it was revealed, like the way that it was, what it resulted in, I feel like it kind of stripped the show of tension, I think. And I felt a lot of the beats with like Skrull Rhodey, kind of versus Fury, I felt were very repetitive. I feel like they kind of like,
it was redundant.
Yeah, it got caught in this cycle where we weren't really like learning anything new about the characters through this reveal, through this relationship.
Yep.
And then, at the end when we get to the real Rhodey, who's been held captive by the Skrulls in the hospital gown, and the director of the series, Ali Salim, did an interview today with Variety where he said that he thinks that that he was replaced after Civil War when he got his injury. So at the end of Civil War. So my first concern is the fact that like the director doesn't seem to entirely know. He just thinks it's a theory. Which is
wild.
Which is troubling.
Especially when they have to direct that scene. So like there's a choice to put him in a gown. What does that mean? Like if you're the director of this and you don't know, or if you're Kevin Feige and you're supposedly in charge of this. Like, who's making that choice?
Yeah.
Why is this vague? How does the director not know?
Yeah.
It's baffling.
And I hate the idea that like one of the few prominent black characters in the MCU has been like an imposter for like over half the time that he's like shown up
I
in
don't
these
love it.
movies.
Don't love it.
And like there's no way that Don Cheadle was playing that as a Skrull. Like there's no way
he
that
was not.
this was planned beforehand. And it really like takes away from a lot of the like prior moments with Rhodey. I love the scene in Endgame where he has that moment with Nebula. And he, you know, she says like I wasn't always like this or something, and he says like me too, you know, and he's talking about, you know, the injuries that he got in Civil War, and like they're both connecting as people with handicaps, which I thought was really interesting.
Mhm.
And then you know, in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, he has that conversation with Sam that I love, just, you know, about like what the shield means, and, you know, understanding, you know, why he gave it back to the government, and, you know, the government's kind of response to a black Captain America. Like those are such important moments. Like they may be, you know, small and peppered in throughout the MCU, but they really helped define this character who like has really only kind of been in Iron Man 2, Civil War, and like a brief cameo in Age of Ultron, you know, before that.
Yeah.
And so like these are kind of like, you know, major defining moments for, you know, helping the audience figure out who Rhodey is. And like already like he's not getting a huge spotlight. So then to take all of that away and say that this is a Skrull, which doesn't make sense.
I agree. Here's how I'm choosing to interpret this, Richard. So I'm going to, unless Kevin Feige comes out and says this is what it is, and even then I want him to prove it to me by, you know, having this be in a movie or something going forward where we see definitively when Rhodey became a Skrull. Until then, I'm choosing to headcanon it in this way. Okay. So for some context, viewers out there may or may not know this. I play a lot of hockey. Okay. And in 2016, I had a severe injury where I dislocated my knee. Not fun. Awful. Do not recommend. Don't do it. It's the worst. So I had surgery. Okay. I had a full-on surgery, major surgery in 2018. It worked for a while. I was able to play, and I was, you know, playing like 4 to 5 times a week sometimes. And it was great. And then I dislocated it again. Some years later, it happens again and I get hurt. And I have to have another surgery. And I say all of that to say, yes, in Civil War, Rhodey gets hurt. And, you know, he rehabs, he gets back to the guy that we see in Infinity War and Endgame. And then, you know, after the events of Endgame, he's continuing to rehab and, hurts himself again and has to go to the hospital. He just, you know, it was just another, he just re-injured it as one does. And when he was in the hospital rehabbing from the second time, that's when he, you know, was taken and became a Skrull.
Yeah.
That's what happened until Kevin proves me wrong. That's what's going on in here. That's how I'm going to headcanon this, because otherwise it is ridiculous. Like, I agree with everything you said. Like, you look back at, you know, and we've seen clips of this all over social media, that moment of him and Nebula and that poignant moment they have. Like, this reveal subverts that in a way that is absolutely awful. Or there's, of course, his moment with Tony, and, you know, at the end of Infinity War. Like, if that's Skrull Rhodey, oh my God, that is the worst.
Yeah.
And there's no way, I can't fathom that Kevin Feige and his team wants that.
Yeah.
I just can't fathom that as the case. And so maybe there's going to be some more clarity to come, but the choices they made in Secret Invasion and the ambiguity of I just don't think is very good. And and here's the other thing about it is like, okay, if you're going to do this, how can we do this in a way that is compelling? And this somewhat circles back to, the idea of these being 6 episodes and them probably need to be a little bit longer because one thing I do find interesting and why there's layers upon layers with this conversation, because I agree with you, Rhodey being one of the few black characters and everything that you said to undermine that is not great. But here's another thing I find somewhat interesting about this is because we come to find out that the scroll that is impersonating Rhodey is actually a female scroll. That's something that I would have loved to see them explore more here.
Yeah.
Because you get that tender moment of her in the shower, and there's this interesting reflective moment where she's getting to be in her own skin, and you see that she's kind of at peace
Yeah.
when she's in that way. And then she wipes the mirror, and what we see is Rhodey, and it's more stoic and maybe a little bit. There's a little bit of discomfort in the performance there. That is an interesting moment, but that's ultimately all that it is. Like the show doesn't expand beyond that in any sort of way. And given what we come to find out with that scroll, like there's a world where if they were to expand on that and really get into the nuances of what that really means, like that death could have been felt. Like that could have been really heartbreaking. But they don't. Like they don't expand on that at all. And so it becomes cheap and unearned in the end. And that to me is where the disappointment of the Rhodey character here is a little bit twofold. There's Rhodey, the character, the hero that we love, but also this scroll, like it was ripe for some richness to be had there. And they ruined it on both fronts.
Yeah. And like to that point, like I felt the same about Beto, who's like one of the new scroll recruits. That guy I kind of brings in at the beginning.
Yes.
Like learning
another
about
good example. Yeah.
And he's just like dispatched by Gravik, like just like so carelessly. We never really get like into his headspace of like what it means. Like, why did he feel a need to join this cause? What does he feel like he's missing, as a part of his culture that he can't express, living in this human identity. And like, there's so many things there you can explore, like, kind of like an under the skin meets Invasion of the Body Snatchers take, where you can like just like really get into like what identity means. And I think like even the comics, like as like explosive as the Secret Invasion like event was in the comics, like you still get into some of that. Like these people have been living in these bodies for years, these stolen identities. How do they interact with people's families? Like their jobs. Like there's so many like little things that I felt like could have been explored. How do they feel about their neighbors? Like how do they really feel about human beings? And all of that is just kind of just like skipped over.
It's very
to the point where I feel like it also just like cheapens Gravik's whole, disgust with humanity and his whole plot, because we really don't have any sense of like how these people are living or like who they actually are as a scroll, as a culture.
Yeah, Gravik is another one that I find just so infuriating because there is such a pivot with the character that to me completely undermines everything they did in the first 3 or 4 episodes, because I do think that he's actually a very compelling villain. Where his motives are rooted in a truth that have a lot of credence. And the show does address this, maybe not well enough, but at least it's something that they do tackle with Fury and his failings to give them a home. And he has some great conversations with Talos about that, which is some of the best that we see here. And even that last conversation that the two of them have. Although, given the reveal there, it's not
Yeah.
really Fury, which is maybe adds to my
Yeah.
frustration a little bit. But the conversation in terms of what's revealed there as far as Fury and his inability to deliver what he promised to the Skrulls, like Gravik's, his concern and his rage and his anger and his emotion, all of it is, well, like there's much to empathize there with
Yeah.
him. And I think there's something to the performance that I love and how Benedict taps into all of that. That is undermined in the last episode or two when we come to see that he doesn't really care about the Skrulls that are,
Which
have
is
chosen to follow
absurd.
him.
It's such an absurd turn.
Like yeah, like all that empathy is just it's Oppenheimered out of the character, like just completely blown up. And I don't understand the writing and the choice there.
Yeah.
Because clearly he didn't care at all. So all that empathy just goes out the window. And I understand that ultimately he's going to be the antagonist here, but you don't have to just subvert his motives to be more mustache twirly. They were much more nuanced and compelling early on. And instead of tackling that nuance, the writers of this show were like, let's just get to the end.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
have
really
the
what it
energy
felt
for
like.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wild decision making here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about that. And then well, let's talk about Talos. What did you think about just, killing off Ben Mendelsohn like that?
Terrible idea. I felt like, to rewind for a minute, like first they'd already killed Maria Hill, which I felt like was a mistake because again, that's another character who like really hasn't had a ton of screen time. Like she's been a kind of a fun presence, but I felt like there's an opportunity to kind of like dig further into her, her relationship with Fury, her former ties with Shield. I thought that she had like an interesting places to go, I should say. And I like Kobe Smulders as an actor. Like I like what she's done with the role. So I felt like that was kind of like a waste. And then like coupled with killing off Ben Mendelsohn's Talos, I was just like, I feel like you guys are just like burning like too many bridges of characters that like really could do a lot more for the universe. And
they
like
thought they were Game of Thrones, and they realized that they're not.
Yeah,
real quickly.
And like, there's not really like a good reason for it. It doesn't really help develop the characters. I mean, like Fury is like sad for a few seconds and then continues on as he did before. There's
like I like that conversation he has with her mom, but that's it. Like that's as far as the show is willing to go to wrestle with any of that. And then wipe our hands of it. We move on. That's it.
It's just like it's such strange writing. I just like I can't wrap my head around the decision making there. It just feels very sloppy. It
does. No, it's very sloppy, very uneven writing here. Again, like this show is weirdly operating at its best when it's doing the Richard Linklater thing.
Yeah.
When it's just characters walking and talking or just sitting and talking.
Yeah, like Fury and Talos on the train. Like that scene.
That was a great moment. Love that.
That scene is so great. And like there's no real reason. Like the same events that happened in the series could have happened with like both Maria and Talos still being alive is the thing. Like their death doesn't change the course of things. No. And so it just feels wasteful.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And again, it's the conflict of Gravik. Like, are we killing Talos in order to demonstrate the prowess of Gravik as a fighter? Like, is that the point of that? But emotionally speaking, you told me that, he's angry that his people couldn't find a home, which implies that he loves his people
Right.
and that he wants the best for them. And I'm angry because we don't have a home and now we're off to fend for ourselves. That's what that implies.
Yeah.
That's not what the character is demonstrating with his actions at all.
Yeah.
Especially and earlier in, I forget the character's name, but in the second episode, he has the meeting with the council and he lets the lady go. Like he doesn't kill her.
Right.
But we're going to kill Talos.
Right.
What does that prove? Like the contradictions within the writing and how the show is constructed, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
And like if you wanted to have like a philosophical and like political like debate between like Talos and Gravik as like these two like, you know, opposite, you know, opposing sides of like what's best for
like
their
at the
people.
cafe, like at the coffee shop, wherever they were.
Yeah, and like
that was great.
That's interesting, but like the way they did it, it'd be like if in like the first X-Men movie, like Magneto just like straight up like murders Xavier, you know, because he disagrees with them and just like abandons like the whole history and relationship and like, you know, conversation of ideology, you know, that can emerge from that. It's just like wasteful.
Honestly, that is a really great comparison because what makes those characters and those films ultimately so captivating is the chess match between those two.
Yeah.
There's no physical war between Magneto and Charles Xavier. And there's obviously physical confrontation between the X-Men and Magneto's guys, but between those two, it's psychological warfare more than anything else, which is of course represented not so subtly by their actual chess games in those movies, you know. But that's what makes those movies fun. And this absolutely could have and should have been that because they both ultimately want the same things, but they're just going about it in different ways, just like Magneto and X. So like, I mean, it's weird. And then the other thing I also think of, because earlier you mentioned how there's an opportunity here for the show to explore Skrulls as it relates to this idea of lost identity. And it doesn't really do that well. However, where it does do that decently is with the Vara character. And again, that's where the conversations that she has with Fury are really great, because she brings up a couple of times, like, how would you feel about me if I was in my own skin?
Yeah.
And she poses that to Fury and he doesn't answer it. He just walks away, which I think is interesting. Like that says something about the both of them in that moment. And then of course the final shot of it is, you know, they regurgitate that same question, you know, so like at least with her, you get a little bit of her grappling with this identity. Like we learn where she got that face to begin with.
Yeah.
And there's a tender poignancy to that as well, you know? And so like, I when the show actually cares, it is borderline pretty good.
Yeah.
It's just really sad that it's like 5% of the show. And the rest of it is like, what are we doing here? You know?
Yeah. And like, when we get to the finale, like so much of that, I feel like is so apparent. It's just like, I feel like nobody cared. Like you get to like the Super Skrull thing and the
oh my God. Yeah.
the harvest. Which
that's, like why the show needed to explore that, because for Fury to just like that's his first thing after Endgame and he comes back from being blipped and his first directive is we got to get this like that is messed up. Like you need to expand on that. You can't just let that go by.
And like I don't necessarily like believe that his character would do that.
Yes.
Because like I mean like he went through like all this trouble to assemble the Avengers and not just like steal like hair samples and blood samples and like you know, like
it makes no sense.
Clearly like he knew that like you needed like a team of personalities, you know, to be able to defend the world. Which ultimately worked. You know, so then like to after that, just like get these samples, which also like strangely included people who were not there in the Battle of Endgame. Like they scroll through that screen and like you see like Ghost and Abomination and like these characters that
Which that does make sense to me though, because Ghost would have already been in the system, so to speak, because she was like a government agent for a long time.
that's true.
And
Yeah.
same thing with Abomination. He's been in prison for
Yeah.
10 years or whatever. So like I can let those like that that makes sense to me, but generally speaking, the broader point, and I agree with you, like it's counterintuitive to what he would choose, unless you're going to give me a couple of scenes where he talks about why he made that choice.
Right.
But we don't get that. Like it's just
And then just to like have a character, like two characters get all of those powers, which
Yeah.
like so many of them are like redundant. Like the cool thing
Yeah.
about like the Super Skrulls in the comics is that like it's like 3 or 4 powers. Like the main Super Skrull that
not
most people
all
know
of
has like
Marvel.
the powers of like the Fantastic Four, you know, and like
Yeah, okay.
you know, each one of his Lego limbs kind of like can do something cool. You know, but it's not like every character who's appeared, you know, in the MCU.
Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
like-
that's ridiculous.
for one, like we've already like established that like Captain Marvel is like one of the most powerful people in the universe. So then like having Captain Marvel's powers plus like every other character, like
Yeah.
it makes it so redundant and so silly. For one, I mean like the first like the battle is just like so like poorly planned. Like if you're thinking about like you think about like the kind of destruction that like the Hulk causes, like just by himself, or like Captain Marvel destroying Thanos' ship in Endgame. Like you think about like how these powers work, which I feel like a lot of the filmmakers have worked really hard to establish, you know, so that it makes sense when they come upon you know, they come upon a threat that they're
Mhm.
actually like struggling against, and they're not just like able to do anything.
And that to me is why it feels so cheap and lazy, because what has made these powers and these characters so fascinating is that we have seen them grapple with what this means to them.
Yeah.
You know, how many times have we seen Banner, you know, talk about how the destructive nature of the Hulk and why he ran from it for so long. You know, it wasn't until Infinity War, I'm trying to recall, Infinity War, where he finally kind of embraced it a little bit and he was able to kind of mesh the both of them together. You know, but the film had earned that. Like we had seen him really grapple with that for a long time. Thor had to earn his powers, but he had to earn that trust and honor of being Thor again, right? Like all of these, Tony Stark had to go through this. You know, Captain Marvel, you know, even though she's powerful, like what's made that character interesting is that she realizes that because she's so powerful, like Earth doesn't really need her. They have plenty of other things to keep Earth safe. She didn't need to show up to the Battle of New York, for example, or Sokovia. You know, the Avengers can handle that. There's other worlds out there that need that don't have the Avengers that need me. And like that ethos says a lot about her as it relates to her power. So like, you know, that's what's made these characters interesting. So now you're just going to throw all of that into one character who doesn't have to grapple with those things.
Yeah,
Like,
and just like
it
immediately knows how to control
And
everything.
immediately knows how to, because that worked out so well for Bruce Banner.
And like there's just like, again, like to use the word like just like sloppiness. I mean, like the rings on like the Ebony Maw's fingers. Apparently, those are part of his DNA.
Yeah, clearly either that or the real story is like that's what was already on the CGI, and we're just using the same CGI. So you know, whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, like even like with Drax's like tattoos, which like like Batista has like talked about, like their tattoos, they're not like part of his skin, you know. And then she does like Mantis's like sleep thing, and it's like, why would you know how to do that? Like, it's just like
and the intonation of it all is exactly the same too. Like sleep, like you know, like the fingers, like it's all the same. Like it's absurd. Yeah, I don't.
it's just like it's so sloppily done.
$250 million. Is that what this show cost? Or 200 million at the very least is what I saw.
212, I think, was the
212.
yeah.
My God, why?
Yeah.
How? How did we get
twice as much as Oppenheimer?
Just God.
And then like
Oh
after Gaia gets these powers and defeats Gravik, then like Sonya Fallsworth shows up and is just like,
Yeah.
hey, do you want to work with me? I've never met you before.
Yeah.
We could both like help each other. And then she just like immediately like no questions asked, just like okay. And then like implausibly, like the president like sets out this like hit squad that's just like to murder like Skrulls, and then like people like start accidentally like murdering like actual human beings.
Well, I will give the show credit for this, even though that moment is unearned in the context of dramatic storytelling. That is probably the most realistic thing that would come out of this.
Yeah,
you would absolutely have a president who would make that choice, and inevitably it would turn into the purge, right?
Yeah.
Like just kill everybody. Who cares of the consequences? Like I totally believe that that's what would happen. And
I think that part is interesting. But like the clip show aspect of it.
No, the execution is not great. No, I agree. And I do think that should have been part of the show, not just like a montage at the end.
Yeah.
Like, like really get into that. And I guess to be fair, maybe when they get to Thunderbolts or something to that effect, because, I've seen the theories and it makes sense that, especially given Fury's line about him being a one-term president, that they're setting up the idea that, Thunderbolt Ross will, become the next president and therefore, we'll get the Thunderbolt team and all that sort of stuff. Like, I guess if the idea is to show the president in this show as being obtuse and oblivious and unaware, then sure, I think they did that well, but the writers have also demonstrated that themselves. So with all these other choices that they've made, and just from a direction standpoint or a production design standpoint, like I want to know where that $200 million is going. Like, is it just going into the effects for that last final fight? Because like, given what we've seen, even in previous MCU stuff, but like the whole setup in the hospital where there's like, this must be a ghost town, this hospital. There's like nobody there. We're talking about the president of the United States. There's like 2 security guards.
Yeah.
And Rhodey, and that's it. Like it just, and maybe we're overthinking this a little bit because it's a Marvel show, it's a Marvel movie, and they're not, we're not doing a documentary on United States, politics and security service or whatever. But it just feels like they didn't think it through. Like there's no details to this show. It feels like they threw everything in a pot, picked a few things, and then just quickly put it all together without any thinking of it.
Even like the ending, like it's interesting to see like the kind of like mob mentality happen. But like I literally like laughed out loud when Fury just like pieces out at the end and like goes back to space, and it's like, we spent this entire show like
that is kind of funny actually. I didn't think about that, but yeah. Okay, now that the United States has gone to hell, I'm out of here.
Yeah,
see you guys.
And like this whole show is about like him like coming to grips with these false promises, like these Skrull refugees on Earth, and now they're being like, now everyone knows they're being slaughtered in the streets. Okay, and then he just like leaves along with his wife, who's like, I needed here, but I'm gonna go with you. Like, you're also supposed to be like fighting for your people, but you're just gonna like go to space with Nick Fury. Like it tries to like do to me, like it tries to have that romantic ending, but then also like you tried to be like a political espionage show and you're not actually like grappling with the consequences of that.
Well, yeah, and it doesn't. And the thing is, like, if I am putting the pieces together correctly, and maybe I'm not, which is part of the writing here and its ambiguities and and how easily confused this could all be, but because he has a line about how the Kree are willing to negotiate, so that implies that okay, he's going to space because he's going to go talk to the Kree and negotiate some sort of peace, and maybe as a result they can go back to their home world or something to that effect. Again, the show doesn't make that clear enough, but there's a little foreshadowing there, I guess, that I guess I can interpret that's what he's doing, but I don't know why the show wouldn't make that clear, especially when he says something like to Var, you're the best. What's the line that he says? They're like the best. I don't know, not ambassador, but what does he say to her? Like, you're the best. I don't know. So, like, he threw out some political term, which implies that like she could be good in terms of like talking through whatever these peace treaties could look like, which is something that was not established earlier in this series at all.
Yeah. Like we didn't even know that like he was reaching out to the Kree to do that.
Yes. Yeah, like it kind of comes out of nowhere. So yeah, it's just, the writing is so contrived and absurdly manufactured. Without
and then he never talks to Gaia again after like the whole
yeah. Thanks for helping me out, and
she becomes like the most powerful, I guess, person in the universe.
That he just says Sonya after, I guess. Like it is weird. I will say though, I do love Olivia Colman because she seems like she understood how dumb and ridiculous this is and just played into her performance so well. Because she's a lot of fun here. A ton of fun.
She is really fun. I wish that like the writers like gave us anything about her, like what her objectives was, like
because we don't really learn much about her. We just know that through Olivia Colman's performance, like she has this snarky personality.
Yeah.
And she's a little quippy and isn't afraid to bark a little bit, get her hands dirty, if you will. She's willing to do that. But we don't really know. Like, according to this thing I'm reading here, it says that she's a high-ranking MI6 agent. Does the film ever actually say that?
I don't think so.
I don't think it does.
Like we never see her like working with like any other MI6 people or reporting to anyone. Like there's I don't even think that it's ever addressed like how she and Fury know each other. Like we just kind of get the sense that they're old friends, but like we don't know how. It's just
it is. It's strange. It's really strange, this show. And we haven't even talked about how it used AI. To make some of the visuals here. Oh, Lord have mercy. I don't know if I have much else good to say, I guess, I just didn't really enjoy this all that much. There's some good things here. I liked the score, or at least that main theme that, comes through.
I like that one too, yeah.
So the music by Chris Bowers here.
Yeah.
I think is one of its best elements. That's about all I have. And Sam Jackson is great. Like, he's always very good. I do like some of the poetic elements that are thrown in here with his character.
Yeah.
In terms of that dialogue and, some of the mysterious elements of Fury that Sam Jackson has always brought to the character. I do love that. I wish that he was given, I just feel like this character deserves writing that is, that gives justice to the character that we saw in phases 1 through 3.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we just don't get that. So
I also thought, like, with the switch out at the end of like Guy opposing his Fury, we never actually get like a conversation between Fury and Gravik, which like the whole show seems to be like pointing towards.
Yeah. And instead it's a facade, that conversation.
Yeah.
Which again is frustrating, the sleight of hand, because there's that moment where Fury talks about what he felt when he was being blipped.
Yeah.
Is that something that Gaia and Fury actually talked about? Is she regurgitating something that he had said to her? Is that real, or did she just completely make that up? Like,
Yeah.
that's an interesting Fury moment that ultimately just might be a lie.
Yeah. And the other thing that bothered me about that conversation is like he says like he knew like years ago that there was no other like homeworld
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
Skrulls. And it's like, I mean, we've seen enough like Marvel space movies, like we've seen Guardians movies, like Captain Marvel is happening.
Could have gone to nowhere to hang out with the Guardians.
There's so many planets that are like habitable, and so like just to like say that line just like rang so false.
You know what? That planet that Thanos was on at the end of Infinity War, I didn't see anyone else.
Yeah, and they
It was a
had
whole
fruit
ass
there.
planet.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And then ultimately Thanos is killed, so who knows? There might not be anyone on that planet.
yeah,
I don't think Fury looked hard enough. That's what
Yeah.
this show demonstrated to me. He didn't look hard enough. Come on, Fury. Yeah. Man, what a mess. What a mess of a show. Really
Yeah.
unfortunate. Anything else disappointing that you wanted to get off your chest before we wrap up here?
I don't know. I would just say like overall, it's probably like the first. Like there have been other like MCU entries that I like haven't particularly cared for, but this is like the first entry where I feel like it like makes the entire universe worse by existing.
Yeah. No, I agree. Wholeheartedly agree, especially given the implications of what it's going to mean going forward. And and I love Amelia Clark. I think she's good here. She's certainly having some fun. You can see that in her performance. But where that character ends up, that's huge ramifications for the MCU.
Yeah,
That I don't think is a good thing.
yeah,
Where are they going to go with that? And it's also interesting because okay, now you have this character that is the most powerful in arguably the entire universe. And she's going to be stuck on Earth working for Sonya. That's what we're
Yeah.
doing with the character?
yeah.
What part of that makes any sense? Unless they're going to outer space.
They wrote themselves
know.
into a box with that one. And then someone else pointed out on Twitter that like, the Marvels is about like this like entanglement of powers. And like now Gaia has the same powers as Captain Marvel. So like, is she not affected by that? Like it just like creates so
great
many
point.
other issues in terms of the storytelling. And it's like the least interesting thing that you could do with Amelia Clark. Like I think that she like is such an interesting actor. And I feel like just making her like a CGI conglomerate of other MCU characters is so uninteresting.
I agree. And if you are going to do this, the only way it works, I think, is to hire an actor or actress that, let's say, has much less recognizability, that would sign up for this role without the need of or that doesn't have to be in any sort of future films or shows. And you do this, you give them the powers, maybe let them wrestle with that for an episode. Again, this doesn't need to be 6 episodes. Expand to 12 or 18 if you have to.
Yeah.
And then you have that fight with them at the end where they kill each other. That's the only way to do that. Otherwise, the implications are too far out there, and yeah, just it's going to be very easy to nitpick going forward with everything that character does. Like, the Marvels, just the whole idea of her being stuck on Earth. It's just so dumb.
Yeah.
It's so dumb. I mean, I guess my last final thought here, I just would really like to recognize the performances once again, and not just Samuel L. Jackson, who's really great, but Ben Mendelsohn is maybe my favorite here. Like, he's just so magnetic, and I love him as this character. I hated that he was killed off, especially when there's really no dramatic or emotional reasoning for it. You know, Kingsley Benadare, I think, is also very good. I like the emotional vigor he gives to the character, the indignancy that he feels. You know, the contradictions in the writing isn't great, but from a performative standpoint, I do like the conviction that he gives to Gravik. You know, we talked about was it Don Cheadle, I think, is having a lot of fun. I think what's interesting about his performance here is that it's so different from what we know of with Rhodey that he's able to kind of be a little snappy here with some of that dialogue. And you can tell that he's having a lot of fun with that from a performance standpoint. Same thing with Olivia Colman, as we talked about. She's just really having a ball.
Yeah.
And Charlene Woodard, I think, is so great, you know, as we talked about earlier. So the performances here are really the only thing that keeps this together in any way, shape or form. So without it, it truly would be a much worse disaster, but it's worse than and yeah, there's not many MCU projects that I flat out dislike. It might just be this and Thor: Love and Thunder. I think that's my only two, really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sad day.
About it for me. Yeah.
Sad day. At any rate, Richard, thanks for being here. Do appreciate you, my friend. Hopefully, when we get together next time, it'll be much more livelier.
I hope so.
Tell us, where can we find you on social media? Where can we find your work, good sir?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Richard L. Newby. You can find my work. I'm currently writing for the AV Club, Vulture, and Fangoria. So you can find all my stuff there. I tweet out most of my articles that I write.
Yeah, please go and check out Richard's work. Really, really terrific stuff. He's one of the best out there in terms of his writing and also on social media. So please go and give him a follow. Really do appreciate it, Richard. So what's next here on the docket? Do we know?
We've got Loki season 2 coming in October 6th.
That I think will bring joy back to our lives.
I hope so. Fingers
crossed. Yeah. I was gonna say maybe I shouldn't get ahead of myself, but fingers crossed that puts us back in the good graces of Marvel. Because Loki, that first Loki, the season 1 is.
That's great.
Where would you rank that in the MCU for you? Do you know? Do you have a ranking?
Yeah, I mean it's up there. It's probably like my favorite. It's my favorite show that the MCU has done.
Okay.
I think I have it like in my top 10 of all MCU projects.
Nice. Yeah. Because I have it, man. That and WandaVision, I go back and forth on.
Yeah. And
me being the emotional guy here, I tend to lean toward WandaVision so much. But Loki is just as great. And I'm with you. It's top 10 for me as far as all of the MCU goes. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to, until proven otherwise, I'm going to go into Loki season 2 with a lot of hope.
Yeah.
If we end up coming back here disappointed once again, maybe you'll see me cry. But until then, we're going to try to have a little optimism here. At any rate, thanks for joining me, Richard. Really do appreciate it, good sir. Thank you to all of our patrons. We really can't do this without you. Your support goes a long way. So thank you to you all. We are going to release this to the public sometime after we release it on Patreon. So if this is after it's released to the public, if you're listening to this and you aren't a patron, patreon.com/InSessionFilm is where you can sign up and get these bonus content episodes early. And also, Brendan and I are going to be doing a lot more Patreon bonus content coming soon. We have a plan that we're going to put together, and we're going to try to get content out weekly, some exclusive content for Patreon. So stay tuned for all of that. So fun way to engage with the show there on Patreon. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or X, whatever it's called. We're Xing now, I guess. It's just so dumb. Speaking of dumb decisions, Richard, what are we doing here with Twitter? At any rate, you can find us there at In Session Film, Blue Sky, Threads. Just we're all over the place. youtube.com/In Session Film as well. We didn't love Secret Invasion, but hopefully when we see Sam Jackson next in The Marvels, hopefully we'll have a lot of good things to say. I am looking forward to that movie.
Yeah.
So, with all of that said, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, man. What a disappointment.